Hi, welcome to my journey. Oh my god. I stayed up last night, trying to cook some the turtles, right? I was trying to cook the turtles using uh caramel, right? Using caramel and it wasn't working. Okay? It wasn't working. Cuz what had happened was I believe I let it get too hot. I let the sugar get too hot, right? And I guess once it comes a certain temperature, that's when it cools down, it gets hard. Okay? I don't have a candy thermometer, and I didn't know what to do, you know, once it got hard. But once I seen it had got too hard, I should have added extra milk, and I did not. But it did teach me another lesson. Let me tell you about it. Hold on. So I go online, not online, but I'm starting to scan, trying to figure out, what I did wrong, right? And is there any way I can salvage my mistake, right? While I'm doing that, right, then I start coming across all of these prepper channels. I mean, these prepper channels was bombarding my algorithm. And I'm like, oh, prepper? And they're like, yeah, you never know, we could have, well, even if we're not directly, involved in in this war, and we got wars and rumors of wars, okay? Even though we're not directly involved in the wars, we're going to be affected by these wars because, whoever's affected by the wars, are going to need resources and stuff from other places. Okay? So I'm like, okay, all right, that makes sense, and like we already know what happened, with the economy and everything, and I don't know if, because of the tariffs, the farmers who are making, like grocery deals abroad and stuff, yeah, it just was, a big problem, right? And since, it was a big problem, a lot of them are rebelling. So that's a civil war that we got going on. And I know, y'all know that our grocery stores are making profits abroad. They're not just feeding us, but they feeding the whole world, right? And also, they do have to play a part in doing some charitable, feeding too. But that's how it got started. It got started, first of all, by supplying, charitable foods abroad. And of course, once the logistics was created, to feed the charitable foods abroad, then, people wanted to start lining their pockets, to capitalize off of that, and they did, and they are, okay? So, right now, as you know, they're trying to break down where's this fraud coming from, right? They're still trying to clean out this swamp. Okay? And it's hard to clean out a swamp when the snake is very influential, okay? Because this is the one thing that kind of tripped me out when I came down here to the south. When I came down here to the south, I couldn't believe that here I was, a black northerner, right? Well, let's say a minority northerner coming down here to the south, and then the southern minorities was calling me a Yankee. I was looking at them like, are they cuckoo? Right? And I've even had conversations with some of them. I'm like, look, you guys got me twisted. Why y'all keep calling me a Yankee? You see, I'm a minority. Right? And they're like, yeah, but you still a Yankee. I'm like, what? What you talking about? What you talking about? Make it clear to me. We just went up there where they were like, not only are we not going to take care of you, but you better take care of yourself. Yeah, you was free, but don't get free to die. It's one thing to die to be free, but don't get free to die. Anyway, so on with the story. Let's get back on track. Get back on track. Okay, so as you know, they're deciding, okay, we're not going to just, cut them all the way off, right? We're not going to cut them all the way off. They keep swearing up and down that we're going to find jobs somewhere. They know there's no jobs out there. They know this, right? But what they want you to do is they want you to start offering your services. No job required. Okay? This is what they want you to do. Right? The sad part about it is, right, we women, we are not even supposed to be in this war. We're not. But they claim that we're the reason why we're in the war. That's why a lot of women stepped out of the workplace. Right? Because they sensed that the men were going to blame, well, they can't work because the women are in the workplace. Well, women stepped out of the workplace. Many women stepped out of the workplace. Right? And As a result of stepping out of the workplace, some of them, they're doing their crafts. Some men, they're following the women, they try to do the crafts. Women are out here doing YouTube. Some of the men are out here trying to do YouTube, etc., etc., etc. Okay? This is not this is not the result that the patriarchy wants. The patriarchy wants these men to be productive. They don't want these men running off to other countries, berating America and trying to make the dollar go down. Okay? Okay. Right? And it is. It's a berating of America when you have all of these like men talking about, oh, American women, they're no good. Right? That's like taking 50 cents out of a dollar by saying half of the gender is no good. Right? So even these, passport bros, were sitting up there thinking that they was doing America, a service by saying, hey, you can import you a woman, right? And that was cool if you want to import you a woman, right? But importing you a woman means you got to take care of her and be financially responsible for her for 10 years, right? That's not what they wanted, right? They wanted a 50-50 type of situation with an import woman. Right? And they were like, that's not how it works. Right? Why you moving around here like you know what's going on and you don't know shit? And then you going into these other countries talking about 50% of America ain't shit, and you still making the dollar go down. Right? That's the one thing that, we can learn from Britain. Now, Britain, they have a different way of rebelling. And honestly, all of Europe has a different way of rebelling. They're not, loud in your face like, we are here in America because we have the First Amendment right. Okay? But getting back to the prepping situation. So it seems like it was anticipation. There's an anticipation out here that, I can only assume, comes from the farmers and the Mormons, right? Because these religious people, the way that, they utilize their women is they have their women learning how to do prep work, right? So, of course, while I was in my sugar coma, I was watching them, prep this food, right? Or say they're prepping this food and they're saying that by prepping the food, they are extending the shelf life of the food even beyond what is stated on the packaging, right? And how they're doing that is by, one, putting the food in a dark space because light will, break down the food. Taking the oxygen, meaning store it in airtight container because air will break down the food, right? And then also making sure that it's sterile because there's, eggs and larvae and stuff that we can't see that was probably, embedded into the food, or not all of that's removed in the food processing, right? So you have to make sure that those get killed before storing it long term. Oh my God, what happened up here? Yeah. So then something must have happened up there. Yeah. Something bad must have happened up there because he stopped the traffic. Right. So I'm listening to this, right? So now the ones that first started coming down my feed were feeds that were from 2020. Okay? And of course, most of us, we didn't understand what was going on. It did seem like we were getting ready to die, or we were going to go through the apocalypse, right? Right? So then I started getting a whole bunch of different feeds in my algorithm from like 2 months ago. And I'm like, okay, that's understandable. We had like this, crises. We had this crises, food crises, right? But then I started getting some prepper feeds dating like only a couple of days ago, within a week. And I'm like, oh my gosh, so they're teaching people how to be frugal and cook, like if you need to celebrate Thanksgiving, because it's a tradition. And most people, they get 2 days off. They get 2 days off if they're working, right? They get Thursday and Friday off. So typically, it's a long weekend, 4-day weekend. Okay? So they're like trying to, encourage people to figure out new ways, to celebrate Thanksgiving like under $25. Now we know Aldi's, has offered deals where you can get Thanksgiving dinner for under $40. But these are preppers, right? The preppers are like, $40 is too much. Let me tell you how to really save money. So, like I said, I've been watching them, in some of the techniques that they use to canning food, right? They got the freeze dried. Remember I asked, what is this freeze dried? Well, they have a machine that they use that can freeze dry food, on shelves. They created a machine. Okay? Just like they created a machine that can dehydrate food, on shelves. Okay? So, then I'm like, okay, so, a lot of us couldn't prep. A lot of us couldn't prep, right? Even though they want to believe, well, you could have prepped. Well, a lot of us couldn't prep, right? A lot of the minority women, the men are very uncooperative. They are not acclimated into white society, and therefore, they're out here running around here trying to create their own reality. Okay? So, that means that, families of these minority women are probably held by stand-ins. They're only here for a short time, not a long time. Or single women, period. Okay? So, a lot of these women are not, they're not shown, how to prep food. Like I said, my mom, didn't really show me, but because she was, smoking salmon and canning food, she wasn't teaching me how to do it, but because I seen it, I could at least conceptualize it. Okay? Because to me, you don't really know a thing unless you know how to do a thing, and you can do it and then teach it. Then you know a thing. Okay? So, because it's not just a matter of doing it. Just you can do something accidentally. But if you can do something and teach someone, then you probably know how to do it. Okay? At least you know a way that's tried and true where it can be duplicated and still come out successful. So they got these Mylar bags, right? They're like bags that, keep out the light, right? And they can be, sealed airtight. And if you put a packet, and I can't remember, it was like a deoxynizer that takes the oxygen out of the bag. Right? It takes the oxygen out of the bag. Now, I was amazed. I'm like, right? You're taking the oxygen out of the bag? Or you taking the oxygen out of the, the container? My thinking is, could there be traces of this deoxidation in the food? Okay, that was my thinking, because right now we have a lot of people who are suffering, respiratory problems. Okay? And they don't have a history of it. It's something that just, came up on them. And it's strange. Okay? That's all I got to say about that. It's strange. It's something that I don't believe they researched. Right? Because, what do you do? Right? Because immediately my mind was, oh my gosh, they got these preppers that is keeping food for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. Some of them say that they're shooting to try to keep food up to 30 years. Okay, so you're keeping the food for 30 years. You're keeping the food for 30 years. Let's think about how that works. So, say you prep some food, right? And you got this food in rotation, right? Because you're only keeping the ones for 30 years if you have to, right? So you're eating oxidized food, even though you might have hydrated. Okay? It may not be a lot, but could it accumulate over time and cause respiratory problems? Right? And the main thing that they do this with is with dry foods. Right? And they have churches that teach their women on how to, store foods through these techniques of canning, dehydrating, smoking, curing, and flash freezing. And now, I don't know, I guess deoxidizing food, right? Because, when my mom, used to, food prep, right? She food prepped the food with the notion and the idea that, this was already prepared food. all you had to do was just, it was like meal in a bag, right? All you had to do was put the food inside some boiling water, open it up, and boom, you had food that, all you had to do was boil water, right? Because the average person, even if you couldn't cook, you could boil some water, right? And it was called seal a meal, right? It wasn't something that, we felt like, well, it wasn't nothing that I felt like, was going to turn into some, mass, production of people trying to, preserve their foods. Okay? So I'm sitting up here thinking to myself, well, no, most most minorities, they don't encourage, the preservation of food, right? And I'm like, that's got to be like a European thing. Here in America, we didn't really have to think about doing stuff like that because, there was cooperation enough to where, if an environment, got snowed in or something like that, people would send them food and all of that problems. All of that wasn't a problem, you know. But up in Europe, they have to, right? Because up in Europe, they have like 6 months out of the year where it's just freezing cold. Okay? That's their climate. And in some countries, they only have, what could be considered even warm weather for 3 months. Okay? So, because when I think of Mexico, I think of people who automatically, are conditioned to eat what's important, right? They're conditioned to eat beans. They're conditioned to eat rice. And they're conditioned to eat avocados, right? So that's the protein that they need and the omega-3s that they need. Right? Because that's all you need to eat, really, is, complex carbs that create a protein in your omega-3s, and you can survive. But you also need your C's. You need adequate C's. So as long as you taking like your supplemental C's, your vitamin C's, you're going to be all right. Even if you eat beans and rice and an omega-3. And that omega-3 can come from salmon, can come from avocado, it could come from flax seeds, chia seeds, yeah. Okay. So, like I said, in the process of me, trying to, think about, my life, I'm also an empath and I can feel what's going on around me, right? So, The fucked up shit that they did, right, they know had a huge impact on people, before Thanksgiving, right? And Thanksgiving to them is a reminder of why they even came to this country, right? Which was what? Genocide, to take over this land, okay? And the celebration that they got the land. So they don't care that you don't get to celebrate with them. Minorities don't. They don't care if the minorities get to celebrate with them. Because as far as they're concerned, they believe that, they probably would be a lot better off if you wasn't here, right? Because they don't need you now for labor, right? They figure, if they can get robots to replace you, that they can, spend their money on a robot and still be able to live their life happily without you. Now, they don't know what they're going to do with you yet, right? Because they can't just tell you to get out, because all these countries out here have become stringent on opening up their borders. And you can best believe that the people who make the most money here have a huge European influence. (802). There are like 4 spaces over there where they can go and park, but they want to park in between me and this car where there's only 1 space. Interesting. So anyway, getting back to what I was talking about, right? Now, dehydration is great. It's even better when you can pack up your dehydrated stuff and then put it into a container that you can take the oxygen out. Okay? So that's what you need to do, number 1, ASAP, as soon as possible. Right? Because what happened this month was kind of like a precursor of what is going to happen next month. Right? And these 2 months are crucial to surviving the winter. Okay? So, you have to prepare these 2 months, November and December, so that you can survive the winter. Right? And I know some of you are thinking you can just go rah, 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 and then get your way. The protest should have showed you just how they're going to treat y'all, right? If you black and you protest, you already know what they're going to do to you. If you Mexican, you can protest, but they're going to tell you, keep it in your neighborhood. So for those people who don't have enough money to prep, you're going to have to make beans and rice and some omega-3s a part of your staple, right? Even if you're going to freeze some avocados, do it, okay? I don't really like avocados. I've frozen some, you know, and vitamins are expensive. Right? And then hopefully, once we get past, you know, the year of the snake, right? Once we get past the year of the snake, maybe we can get into some, you know, a different, you know, a different shift of reality. You know, you guys are going to have to stop. You're going to have to stop eating out. You're going to have to stop acting like, you know, money is abundant, because it's not. It is not. You know, I don't know who these black people are that park right next to me in this Denali, you know, GMC, you know, eating their fast foods in front of me, but I'm not going to sit here and take it. I'm going to move around. Move my ass somewhere else. And also, be very careful. Be very careful, you know, when taking foods, right? Because like I said, a lot of these foods, you know, are foods that have been held on to way beyond their expiration date. And they're claiming that that food is still good, right? Well, being food that's edible is not the same as food that is nutritious. Let's be clear about that. Okay? Because food that is edible just means that, you know, you might get some minor sicknesses. You might get minor, what do they call it? Food poisoning, but you can survive. But food that's nutritious is food that is going to give you the building blocks that you need. Okay? Yeah. I don't know if y'all need to feel strong in order to get through this, but do what you got to do. Do what you have to do to get through it, right? Because, you know, one thing that is for sure, you know, change is going to come, right? Perspectives are going to change. And a lot of times, you know, people will look back on some of the things that they had done, you know, and actually be, you know, regretful. They're not going to be remorseful, because if they was remorseful, you know, they would try to, you know, create some type of restitution, but they're not going to go that far. It's just going to be a regret. Oh, well, I wish I could have did something different, but at the time I didn't know anything. I couldn't think past what I wanted and my desires. That's how they feel. Okay? So I hope that this video is helpful to some people out there. I do. I think it's important, that you need to understand that not everybody thinks like you do. That there are different ways of thinking out there, right? And as you know, there are people out there that have a lot more influence about the way things happen in this world. Most of the time, it's through the coins, right? But not all the time. Sometimes it's through the power of influence, right? And a lot of people feel like if they were able to have the influence be a factor, they automatically claim that influence must be a positive influence. And that's not true. That is not true. All it is that, they were able to, use a frequency that a lot of people could relate to, right? Just like music. Music could state some of the most vilest things, and yet, people are like, well, I like the beat. So subliminally, they got all of this ratchet music, pumping in their subconsciousness in the background, even though they just like the beat. Okay. So that was something that I felt like that I had to get out and tell y'all, because like I said, I was definitely, in my sugar coma, right? Because I tried to make some caramel and it didn't turn out the way that I wanted it to. It turned out being hard-ass candy caramel, right? Makes me wish that I would have made some little droplets, that way I could suck on the caramel. Now I'm trying to figure out, can I melt it down again? Because I can't figure out why I can't melt it down again, right? Because it ain't nothing but sugar, butter, and a little bit of cream. Why can't it be melted down again? So that's one of the things that, I'm thinking about, melting it down again. Okay? There's a lot of things I thought about doing over again. And this is something that we're starting to see more and more. Well, I'm starting to see more and more on my algorithm, where people are like making yogurt, from yogurt that they've already bought. Making breads from breads that have already been made. Right. And of course, when it comes to sugars, we have all forms of sugars, right? We have syrup sugars, we have cane sugar, we have crystallized sugar, we have powdered sugar, we have sugar in all forms, right? So that's all I could see caramel really is. It's just sugar. There's nothing but sugar. But those are the type of foods that make us feel like, oh my gosh, this is what makes the holidays, right? People break out the candy canes, the peppermint bark, right? Like for me, peppermint creamer. Would be, a perfect Christmas, item. And the thing that really tripped me out in the process of watching these foods and food testing and stuff like this is that men purposefully reject anything that's too sweet. And they're like, that's too sweet. And they instantly think about, working it off. Work it off. Okay? Which, women kind of are the opposite. Can I go? Right? They see something sweet, they're like, can I have some more of that? When's the next time I can have some more of that, right? So, but in other words, we weren't, it's not socialized into us not to have sugars. Because typically, if women didn't have the sugars and had the extra storage of fat, men couldn't afford to feed women the same way that they fed themselves. They just couldn't afford it. So they're like, you have this, you have this smaller piece. You have this bread. You have this pasta. I'm not very hungry. All I want is a piece of steak and potato. That's it. Okay? And, they don't care if, eating meat makes them feel more predatory. They don't care. Because meat will make you feel more predatory. You won't know where it came from. You're like, my God, I just had a piece of meat and I'm feeling like I could go jog a mile right now. Just a bite. You eat a whole steak, you think you could do a marathon. Okay? So, like I said, for those people, who haven't done any prepping, that's what the prepping is, you're going to need to learn how to do. If they mess around with the weather, such as using, weaponizing liquid nitrogen, to make it more colder, they do recommend that, you at least have, some plastic wrap, right? A thick plastic wrap, such as that's used in construction. Some duct tape. Oh yeah, the people are completely different on this side from that side. On that side over there, yeah, definitely different. If you're cold inside of your house, make a tent inside of your house that will help insulate where you are at, so you're not spending excessive money trying to heat up the whole house. Right? And I know some of you are like, well, I'll just put on more clothes. Yeah, but you're putting on more clothes, and these clothes, over time, will absorb the oils from your body. Okay? And when your body's warm, it will make you feel like you're warm. Okay? Because the oils will warm up within the fibers of that attire, and yes, you will feel warm. However, if your body has cooled down, that oil will also get cold, and you can have 5 layers and still feel cold because you sweated some oils onto your attire. Okay, so if we take this situation, with common sense and logic, and common sense and logic is not being in denial, okay? It's not being in denial. Even if you don't go and buy rolls of construction garbage bags, right? Just, get with a friend and y'all go and buy some, and at least make sure you have, a good 3, 4, 5, garbage bags on hand for each of you. See, if y'all wasn't so selfish, y'all could do, this share the benefits and share the cost type of situation. Right? Y'all pitch in how much it would cost to buy some construction garbage bags. It's more expensive than what you would do, with a common guarded garbage bag. Are you Tai Chi walking? Are you Tai Chi walking?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm just slow running.
Oh, okay. I was just wondering if
that now.
Okay. I thought she was Tai Chi walking. I'm like, is that Tai Chi walking? Maybe I should try it. Because I keep hearing about Tai Chi walking, right? The Tai Chi walking is good for people that are older. And I thought that's what she was doing. I thought she was Tai Chi walking. She was like moving in slow motion. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, boom, boom. So I had to ask her, like, go on and ask her. She's doing some Tai Chi walking. And she was like, you know what? That's what I'm going to start saying. What I am doing is a Tai Chi walking. Yeah. Feel good about what we doing out here for real. Okay. So yeah, because I had dated a guy who was in construction, and he had brought home some construction garbage bags these construction garbage bags are huge, right? If you cut them open, you got a tarp just about. And that's how thick they are. They are thick. Right? You could put like 3 or 4 regular lawn trash bags inside of the construction trash bags, and you could put sticks, stickers, some metals and stuff, and it doesn't go through. It's not going to puncture through. Okay? So you can even use that, like if you're creative enough, you can use that as an insulator and create like your own sleeping bag. Now, waterproofing, you can waterproof something by using candle wax. That's the cheapest way, is using candle wax. Or using watered down glue. You can use watered down glue or candle waxing. And that way, that's one way you can waterproof some things. I don't know if some of y'all are out here living in tents, but you can consider doing that. Brushing on a coat of that. Let it dry, brush on another coat. Let it dry, brush on another coat. Okay, and that will help waterproof your tent, waterproof your sleeping bag, waterproof your flooring. Now, if you live in a van, a vehicle, and you have like flooring that you can put epoxy on, do that, because epoxy is easy to clean and it doesn't it's antimicrobial, right? Meaning that bugs and stuff, they don't want to live on it. They can't live on it. It's just something that they won't digest. They can't digest. So that would probably be the best way, to make your floors as sanitary as possible, is to epoxy them. If you can. Epoxy is pretty expensive. And if you have a lot of condensation, you can do almost any surface you got. And what that will do is it will petrify the surfaces that you applied the epoxy to. Okay? Uh-oh. Here comes an emergency vehicle. So that's all I have to say for now. I did not walk yet, but I will.